Welcome back. Yes, indeed, Honorable Mark Gbillah is a member in the House of Representatives. He joins us from our studios in Abuja, but we'll also get to see former Minority Whip in the House of Representatives, Dr. Samson, will also be joining us. Samson Osagie is a managing partner, Law and Justice, so he's getting his legal sides back on, so we'll get to hear from him as well. But let me start with you, Honorable Gbillah. Well, yeah, the country saw most recently, I don't think they'll forget in a long time, the scenario that played out in the National Assembly, and that they say, look, it speaks to leadership, it speaks to our recruitment process, it speaks to getting those institutions right, and if we can't get them right at that stage, it puts a lot more people who think they have a thing or two to contribute to building our nation off. And they say the blame, as a matter of fact, stops at the feet of politicians, of which you are one.
Good morning, Chamberlain. It's a pleasure being on the program this morning. And let me applaud you and commend Channels for highlighting this very critical aspect of our nation's development. It is not something we should take lightly or just address in one morning's program. It's something that we should probably institutionalize in our educational institutions, which is critical. But let me start to answer your question. The bane of our country's development is leadership. That is why this issue is so critical. And you see, Nigerians want to abdicate their responsibilities when they say the problem is politicians, because from the onset, they are supposed to guard and guide the leadership selection process, which is why the situation always seems as if it's a catch-22 situation, the hen or the egg kind of issue. Let me explain what I mean. For instance, we have started a process that is critical to the Nigerian society that will determine those who emerge as the leaders of this country, because we have chosen a democratic style of government which has certain checks and balances that must be put in place. Now, have Nigerians really shown that urgency to say, this is what we want and we are insisting on what we want? There are avenues to do so. There are ways they can go about ensuring that their representatives protect their interests. I'm talking specifically with regards to the Electoral Act. That singular aspect of transmission of results, for instance, which was very blatantly compromised by the Deputy Speaker playing the script of the APC-led government, is on its own going to disenfranchise majority of Nigerians of the true results of their votes. Now, Nigerians shouldn't give up in that regard. There's a registration process going on now, and these are ways in which I say the buck still stops with Nigerians. How many of us as Nigerians are turning up to register? How many of us are conscious that registration is critical to being able to determine what leadership will be chosen at different levels of government? And I also want to agree with your previous speaker when he talks about getting involved in politics. Some of us have never been in politics before. My first election was the first time I became a partisan person. I became a card-carrying member of a party. But the conviction I had was that if we all don't realize, even those of us who have Ivy League education, should put our hands to the plow, then the issue of leadership in this country will never be addressed. In some climes, in some societies, they actually think politics is meant for fraudulent and dubious people. But unfortunately, these are the people who determine the policy that drives our lives as Nigerians and as a country. This is not something we should joke with. And I
Right.
started
Let's
talking
equally
about
get.
it being something that should also be.
Pardon me. We'll of course, we'll get a lot more from you. But let's equally get Dr. Osagie's perspective. He used to be in the House as a former minority whip, a position that made him a leader among leaders. Thank you again for joining us today. What would you say to this huge question, this challenge we face, and how to address them? Your opening. Dr. Osagie, that's for you. No, you may need to unmute because we can't hear you yet. We still can't hear you. All right, Dr. Sage, we'll need to sort that out because we can't hear you yet, and so we'll hope to sort it out as soon as possible. Well, Mr. Gbillah, we'll have to get back to you on this one now. So, yeah, having established that and how you got into politics, well, it then does appear as though, would you say you've been able to make the requisite impact having gotten there?
Well, that is for the constituents that I represent to determine, and for Nigerians in general also to determine. But individually and personally, I would say that within the limitations of my powers as a member of the legislature, I would say that I've tried to uphold, and that is why it is important, the kind of individuals that get into positions of office. I've tried to uphold what I believe is the best interest of the Nigerian people. I've tried to speak truth to power. I've tried to stand on the path of justice, equity, and truth. I have avoided everything that would compromise the mandate for which I have been elected. And these are things that squarely rest on the shoulders of the person in that office who is given that leadership opportunity. And that is why it is critical. I have not pursued personal gain against the general interest of the people. If you were to leave me alone now, everything in Nigeria would be fixed. Believe me. But I don't have that authority alone. I don't have that power alone. For instance, one of the critical things that is urgently required in this country is the issue of independent candidacy in part of our constitutional amendment process. In other climes, independent candidates are elected, far and in between. But in Nigeria, I want to tell you it will be a revolution that will transform our political landscape, because we will now have the opportunity as politicians to approach the electorate directly.
Okay.
And
Honorable Gbillah, I'd like you to shed a lot more light on this. How is this going to play out? Because, I mean, what we see with political parties is they talk about structure. You see them fight so much about handing over a structure or controlling the quote-unquote structure. So if one were an independent candidate, how is he going to, because you have to, when it has to do with voting at that level, you have to have agents who will supervise, ensure that things go right in your stead. And in some cases, when parties of which you could testify, when they pay an agent, if another party comes in and bids higher, the agent leaves that party and moves to the next one who offers him something higher. So if an independent candidature or candidacy comes in here, how is he going to square off with parties that have got resources, huge resources, for that election?
Now, this is where we should realize that the advantages will be with regards to an independent candidate. The people, let me start from the issue of the agent. Whoever would be the agent of an independent candidate will be doing so by personal conviction and volition, not financial motivation. And that is a more driving incentive and imperative for a human being in those circumstances than anything else. For you to be doing that when you know that this particular individual doesn't have the resources, that other parties have, but you are convicted that this person is the one to deliver. And I can assure you, majority of Nigerians do not have a choice in our current political system, because whatever we churn out from our political parties is what they have to choose from. So when you give them that option of choosing somebody else, apart from that, I can assure you, majority of them will go for the people who they have seen have credibility. And one of the issues we have in our political system now is the issue of godfatherism. Political parties, in some instances, are at the behest of individuals. Our party selection process is part of the problem. Just like we're talking about leadership selection process, it also happens, and it's also a problem within our political parties. People have interests about who they want to emerge. Our primaries, a lot of times in certain instances, are not transparent. We have a primary system that makes the cost of elections humongous and unreasonable, where people determine who becomes a candidate by inducement, by incentives. These are things that we know as Nigerians. These are things that will be eradicated if we had the issue of independent candidacy, because the person would only just approach the generality of the public and explain to them what he needs to do. Now, there's another issue we need to be aware of as Nigerians. In the Electoral Act, there's a provision for contribution to elections, but some of us are trying to look at whether we can have a standalone legislation, and something I'm working on that has to do with contribution to elections. We should realize as Nigerians that we have to play a part in determining who our leaders are. Many people are not motivated because of the current political system, where they know it will be manipulated during the primaries. They know whoever is going to emerge is because of the interests of certain godfathers and individuals. But if they had an independent candidacy and legislation that guides how to contribute, then I believe we should realize we have our own fate in our hands. We can come together as Nigerians. We need to start to be aware of this. Put the resources together to counter any money bag or to counter any party
and I think
that
it's
wants
important,
to use financial
Honorable,
inducement.
right. I think it's important really to explore that that area. I mean, the money that makes politics tick, as it were. And it will be quite interesting to see what comes out of that in the coming days or months when you return from recess. But before we go to break, in just well, Honorable Mark Gbillah, now speaking of that expression, politics is a dirty game, which has been used time and again, and referencing that scenario that played out, the scuffle at the floor of the House just over the past week. What exactly was going through your mind? I mean, you were right in the middle of that. We saw Honorable Gagdi and some others. What kind of considerations? Because people were watching, and perhaps that will reinforce that conclusion that maybe politics is indeed a dirty game.
Okay, thank you very much. Politics is not a dirty game. On the contrary, it is the means we have come as civilized members of the society globally to realize is the means we can bring governance to the people and be able to coordinate the implementation of policies to the general good of the people. Now, the issue we have in Nigeria specifically is it is the participants in politics who are dirty and irresponsible. With regards to that specific incident, the deputy speaker, who apparently now seems to have a personal grudge and vendetta against me, we all remember the whole Muta incident. I didn't know then that there was that personal grouse he has against me, but that was displayed during the course of this electoral act, because when some of us got up to express our dissatisfaction, he seemed to focus on me and try to rain invectives upon me. And what you saw transpired with Gabdi a member from Plateau State, who is want to behave like a thug on the floor of the House, to seem to think that he alone has the sole prerogative to physical altercation. So after that incident, the Deputy Speaker told him that I abused him, which obviously that didn't happen. And then he came to physically confront me, you can imagine, on the floor of the House. Now, do you consider that to be politics? It is not. It's an individual who does not have the comportment and the pedigree to be able to realize that is an honorable house and you need to comport yourself in a decent and civilized manner. He came to confront me physically, and except for the intervention of other people, it will have really degenerated into an all-out fracas, because obviously as a human being, I have to defend myself. But you see, these are the kind of things that occur that make people think that it is politics, that is dirty. It's not politics, it is the people who we do not take care to consider before we elect them. And these are part of the issues we have. In politics in Nigeria, our constitution, our laws say the party sponsors the candidate, but it is the other way around. The candidate sponsor the party. So this is a fundamental issue we have, and Nigerians should rise up and realize. Whoever brings money, wherever they get it from, is who the parties a lot of times choose to represent them, because they feel they will bring money to pump into the exercise. Can Nigerians please realize we have to rise up and start to put monies together so that candidates will be able to bear the cost of the electioneering process without compromise? This is part of the fundamental problems. In the parties that we have these days, without equivocation, I can tell you, whoever wills the most resources most of the time gets the ticket, because of the costs of electioneering that the party has no means of taking care of. And we should... Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Honorable. For a number of people, they believe that these are some of the critical issues. So let me quickly take this to Benin, where we have Dr. Samson Osagie, who is a managing partner at Law and Justice Chambers, Abuja. We've been trying to get him for a while, former minority whip also of the House of Representatives. Honorable, I do not know if you agree with Honorable Gbillah here, some of the things that he's talked about in the leadership recruitment process. But I would like your thoughts on some of the things you think can be corrected in that process, and you think that might have been addressed perhaps in this electoral act, which was quite contentious.
Well, thank you very much, Malkbe. I hope I can be heard now, because I heard you very clearly. I think that this is one topical issue that we need to continuously address. Because Chinua Achebe, a renowned international writer and poet, did put it in his book, The Problem with Nigeria. And the summary was that the problem with Nigeria is one of leadership. And I dare say that the issues that have been canvassed both by Professor Abbas and my friend Gbillah are quite true and correct of our body politic as we speak today. It is one of the results of breakdown of values. Let's even start from the university system. How do you get good leaders recruited from a set of graduates that have been taught how to cheat in order to pass examinations? How do you empty such a set of people into the society and expect that when they are given positions of responsibility, they will perform well? That is one. Two, how do you get a leadership recruitment process right when all it takes to be able to get the ticket of a party, most of the time, is to be able to have as much money as possible to spend and be ready to finance the bills of the political party towards election? These are two critical points. And I dare say that what we need is a leader who will reposition and reset the political thinking of the political class as to how the best set of people can emerge within a political process. It's just like trying to fight corruption. If you want to fight corruption and then you are slapping people on the wrist, and then you think you are fighting corruption, and then you are giving preferential treatment to some people who are considered special, then we can never fight corruption. Singapore fought corruption by jailing a minister who merely traveled with a businessman on a business trip and came back. He came back and was arrested and jailed, a minister of government. So the point is that we must be able to agree that we need to fix our country, and we need to give it a leadership that can drive a process that will lead to the development of our institutions of governance. Now, coming to the issue of the Electoral Act, you will know clearly that the debate about the Electoral Act, which of course turned the way it has done, it was purely partisan in approach. And that shouldn't be. And I believe that regardless of one party's affiliation, national interest must be paramount in the mind of everybody. I carry a party card, but that does not mean that I am not interested in a Nigeria that will be better for us. Because before the party comes the country comes first. How do we continue to have an electoral process where the outcome becomes doubtful and court begin to set them aside? So to answer your question, I believe that the two plaguing challenges for leadership recruitment in our country is the fact that there are no more values that are being taught both from home and both from school, both from home and the school. And our institutions have been so degraded that they have come to understand certain things done in the Nigerian way. There is a Nigerian way that seems right to those who hold the reins of power. And if you do it the Nigerian way, you don't get a better result for the entire society. And the political parties are not helping matters because theirs is who pays the highest. And once you are looking for those who pays the highest, not those who have leadership leadership qualities. And that is why people can just be brought in from anywhere to take positions in government, whereas the party have not had the opportunity of knowing this person in terms of participation in the political process, in terms of contributing to the process, and even begin to understand his mental capacity to be able to handle issues of leadership in the politics. So I agree with him that most of the times we take into account partisan considerations in doing what we have to do, and that is not good for the system. And then the issue of money is playing a very big role in downgrading the quality of leaders that we are going to have, because the education we get and the training we get is not a determinant factor of how much you are able to make from the society. A lot of people go outside the education they have earned. Some don't even earn any education, and they're able to make more money from whatever source. And they come into the political process and shove everybody aside and bulldoze their way through. If those kind of guys get into political position, what do you think they will do? And that is the challenge we're having.
The big question is, you know, what is being done to, are these conversations happening within political parties? For instance, you've talked about how it was sad, what we saw on the floor of the House. I mean, how things got to a heated end, so to speak, even though we later on heard that, you know, certain provisions had been made and were passed. But are these conversations happening largely within political parties that country must come first? That, you know, there has to be a country before there are political parties, that political parties will not be sustained in the long run by this sort of attitude. I mean, are this sort of conversations happening within political parties from your own experience?
You know, the definition of a political party is that it is an organization that comes together for the purpose of capturing power. And the purpose of capturing power ought to be to develop a nation, provide for the citizens services, and protect them against danger. And that is why the Constitution says that the primary purpose of government is the provision of the welfare of the people and the security. Now, I do not hold any party position anywhere, but I can assure you that if these conversations were going on, then we will have less and less of these problems. And the kind of demonstrations of pure partisanship on issues of national interest in the legislature will not be the case. That is the truth of the matter. And I want to believe that unless and until we have leadership at both party levels and at governance levels, we are not going to have these discussions fully internalized within the party structure of any political party. And that is why, as we speak today, the political parties are not really entirely different from one another, because the primary purpose that they work towards is to capture governance and retain power. So I believe that this kind of discussions ought to form the bulwark of leadership training within political parties, so that at every level of the party, they are internalized to the extent that it is not about getting power that matters. It is about putting the nations first on issues that will benefit the nation and benefit the masses. And that is why our political campaigns are usually not issue-based. If they were issue-based, then you can understand that, oh, those who are going to come out from that political process, we have a scintilla of national interest guiding their actions when they do get to government. But because our campaigns, our political activities are really not issue-based across board, what we find is that our actions are guided by partisan consideration at all times. And that is not good for national development.
I think the natural question is, what do we do then to begin to correct this? You've talked about how broad the problem is. You've talked about university students who are cheating their way through schools. I think only recently the University of Benin asked the students to rewrite exams from 200 level till she's graduating now. She's supposed to be graduating now, but because she was said to have been wearing a T-shirt saying aggressive malpractice brought me to this point, the University of Benin has asked her to rewrite all her exams. If the problems are that broad and we begin to see them even more entrenched in our political process, because sometimes, you know, these things feed one into another. Society, they say, gets the sort of leadership that it deserves. Where would you say that we begin to address the problems from?
Yes, the ball will still stop on the table of those who hold the race of leadership today. I agree with Professor Abbas when he said that the current government can fix a lot of things through policies and sticking to those policies. For example, what UDBN has done to that student is a desirable one, and it sent a big signal to many students who believe that they have to cheat in order to get their way through. Same for the political parties and the government in power. I want to see a drastic action against persons who do not comply with certain rules and regulations that should guide their actions at both party levels and at government level. So unless we reset our political thinking, and I want us to reset our political thinking through policies and committed implementation of those policies and guidelines. For example, I like the approach that government is using to deal with secessionists, regardless of what anybody wants to say. And that kind of approach is one that sends strong signals to those who want to dismember this country. And that same approach must be applied to all issues across board. It should not be selective. If we have that kind of approach to dealing with a problem head on, without paying obeisance to certain considerations, primordial sentiments, and all other issues, then we are going to achieve results. Now, I also want to imagine, for instance, that if we pursue the issue of moral rearmament, value reorientation, through policies that make heads of government's institution to brace up to the challenge of resetting the attitudes of the workforce within their control. And it goes through the entire government of government machinery. And the leaders do so in their respective areas by example. I am sure that government and the citizens are going to follow suit. Rwanda did not just become what they are today. They have to employ strict policy measures in order to inculcate into their citizens the right behavioral pattern that is expected of both the leaders and the led in order to have a country that they can collectively call their own. It is a crime in Rwanda today to throw a piece of paper on the streets. You will go to jail for it. But what happens in our setting when people breach the law, And depending on where you come from, or sometimes what faith you profess, nobody's going to ask you any question. So we must leave a level where we are selective in our enforcement of laws, and then we are broad and general in some of the things we do. We must make it so broad. And I think government has a responsibility to drive this process. And the citizens must be reawakened. Sometimes we complain that even the followers are not even helping matters. Yes, they are not helping matters, because when it comes to the process of leadership recruitment, what most citizens are, looking for is what they can get from the entire process. I saw a video recently where some persons, whether in Ghana or somewhere, were rejecting bags of rice and demanding for jobs. Those are the kind of orientation and enlightenment that the citizens must get, and the kind of reaction that they must put up in order to be able to stem the tide of the degeneration of our value system that will make sure that we have a leadership recruitment process that benefits the entire citizenry and not just those who are elected into public office. So I suggest that policy measures and implementation must be driven by the leaders at every level of government, not necessarily at the level of the president or at the level of the governor. Leadership must be driven at every tier and at every level, whether private or public. The issue of you doing things
Dr.
the Nigerian way must not be.
Dr. Samson Osagie, we're totally out of time. We have to thank you for your contributions this morning. He's a managing partner of Law and Justice Chambers here in Abuja and also former minority whip of the House of Representatives. Let me quickly come to you, Honorable Gbillah, for your closing comments. I mean, he did say that he's quite happy with how the federal government is treating secessionists in the country, but he says it needs to be applied on a general level. You agreed with him on that?
Okay, yes. Let me appreciate my former colleague, my friend, Honorable Osagie, for his comment. I know he very clearly admitted he's a card-carrying member of the APC, and it is good when members of the ruling party speak to their own government. You know, I joined the National Assembly under the platform of the APC. Some of us spoke against what we believed was wrong before some of us left, when we didn't perceive or see any acceptance of the wrongs that were going on. The treatment of the secessionists should not be biased, like he rightly said. We have a country that has declared IPOB has proscribed IPOD, declared them as secessionists. But this same government, this is what we're talking about, leadership, this is not proper leadership, has refused to identify herdsmen as terrorists, when every international organization, the United Nations, have tagged them as one of the terrorist groups in this country. We are going after Nnamdi Kanu. How many of the herdsmen have been apprehended and prosecuted? Now, this does not speak to leadership. This is part of what we have an issue with.
Those who argue say that they're not under any known group or heading, so to speak.
No, but you have heard Mieti Allah severally own up about certain attacks. Even recently, there was a certain statement made against my governor about certain actions, about a certain group that was threatened except he reverses the anti-open grazing law. I'm sure you're aware of that, and several other instances like that. There are faces to these groups and these organizations. And even if you say there's no group, which there are, then it is still the responsibility of the government to make pronouncements and show by their body language that they are interested in tackling this issue as well. And that is not what we're seeing from the current leadership. We have leadership in this country at various levels who display crass irresponsibility. The Comptroller General of Immigration very recently physically assaulted one of my people from Benue. Is that display of leadership? There are certain issues we as a House are going to investigate also about allegations of he renting his property, where they're having the expert center in Abuja, and several other issues. You know, this is what we experience. Your guest mentioned the Attorney General, who at several levels displays complete lack of leadership by his pronouncements, equating the issue of anti-open grazing to spare part dealers. You know, very careless comments. These are not signs of proper leadership. Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore transformed the country. My colleague just talked about Paul Kagame. And then even in areas where they don't even practice democracy, it shows you that leadership is the issue. In China, in the United Arab Emirates, see what they have transformed their country into. It shows you that the bane of Nigeria's development is leadership. And that was not displayed even on the floor of the House by the Deputy Speaker, who very undemocratically perpetrated a travesty on the Nigerian people, and Nigerians should be aware. And the NCC further buttressed that by coming to tell Nigerians falsehoods about their capacity or otherwise against their own reports that are in the public domain.
Well, Honorable, I know that these issues are going to, be on for a while, and we're not going to shy away from talking about them. We have to thank you for your contributions this morning. Honorable Mark Gbillah is representing Gwe East and Gwe West Federal Constituency in Benue State. Well, we'll quickly take some of your